Well, this is Sue's text, and I won't do justice to her tone, her rhythm, the cadence that you know, but I think I can deliver her message, and if I falter, you can forgive me. These are her words. Context is everything. Jesus was not a popular guy. Certainly there were many who loved him, some who followed him, and a group of those who were close to him. But there were others, many of whom represented the religious or political leaders of the time, who were not only dubious about him, but who eventually sought to discredit or kill him. Not everyone was happy with his message. So on this day we encounter Jesus teaching, maybe in a local synagogue, maybe in a village square, maybe on a hillside. Luke doesn't make that clear. What we do know is that Jesus was teaching, and the people drawn to his message included tax collectors and sinners. These were people that, according to the Jewish laws of cleanliness, did not pass muster. These were those who didn't toe the line, who cheated their own people out of money for the Roman overlords, or who simply did not attempt to live their lives by the code set out and followed in the Jewish tradition. They were us, you and me, Gentiles and others who were not perfect and maybe didn't live up to the same religious code. These people, the undesirables, were gathering around Jesus because they wanted to hear what he said. There was something about who he was and what he said that called them, challenged them, assured them, and drew them closer. Off to the side, so as not to be contaminated by the riffraff, stood the scribes and the Pharisees. These were the guys in the know. They represented the leadership of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and prided themselves on being those who kept the law rigorously and taught others how to live it well. These guys, they were not impressed with Jesus. By this point in his ministry, Jesus was being watched, tested, and in general troubling to the religious powers that be. Today was no exception. The scribes and Pharisees stood off to the side, probably with their arms crossed, their lips stitched together, and watched what was going on. They didn't like what they saw. This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them, they complain. Understand, this kind of companionship was really quite against the holiness rules. Jesus was not being as selective as the church of the time needed him to be in order to be safe within the prescribed behavior recommended for a good Jewish boy. Jesus, in response to their critique, launched into a series of parables. And parables were a common teaching method of the time. They were stories told to get a point across. They were, as one person put it, heavenly stories with an earthly meaning. On this day, Jesus told 3 parables, one about a lost sheep, one about a lost coin, and the third one about a lost son. It was this last one, the story of the prodigal son, that we are going to be looking at in depth over the next month. Before we get any further, this is the interactive part of the sermon. Before we get any further, it's interesting to know what the definition of prodigal is. Now, Sue invited me to ask you to take out your phones. This is the only time you get to do this during the sermon. Take out your phones and look up the word prodigal. And while you're doing that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a tip on what I found. So prodigal, used as an adjective, means spending money or resources freely and recklessly, wasteful and extravagant, having or giving something on a lavish scale. And as a noun, a person who spends money in a reckless and extravagant way. So, in the text that you might see in front of you, I think this follows the same theme. If you see something different, call it out. But this is the idea of prodigal. This is what prodigal meant in the parable. Now, it remains to be seen who the prodigal actually is in this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger one came to him and asked for his share of the inheritance up front. You need to know that this was a remarkable thing. It was unheard of. It probably would be now. Back then, it invited the parent to divide up his estate in advance. Everyone in the audience before Jesus would have been appalled by the audacity of the son. He wasn't just asking his dad to go to the bank. He was asking him to divide up his property. And property at the time was identity. It was the foundation of the family stability. It was passed from generation to generation as an expression of God's gracious care for God's people. It was not divided up and sold off lightly. So to ask your father for your inheritance, the son was asking for his father to divide up the family land, sell part of it, and give it to him. He was saying, in effect, I wish you were dead." Now the audience back then would have been outraged. They would have expected the father to react with anger, to yell at his son, maybe disinherit him, possibly even strike him. But the father didn't. He did as the son asked. Divided off 1/3 of his property, which would have been the youngest son's share, sold it, and gave his son the money. Unbelievably wasteful and extravagant. So, as the story goes, what did the young man do with the money? He spent the money like a sailor on shore leave, like he was made of it, spending with complete abandon. Wine, women, and song. He was extravagantly wasteful, throwing his money about. He thought he would never run out, but it did run out. Eventually, according to Jesus, this young man found himself broke, hungry, and living in a distant country. To make matters worse, at that point, a severe famine impacted the area where he was, and so without family or friends to care for him, there was no way to be fed. He fell so low that he ended up feeding pigs, the worst job, the most unclean animal imaginable for his people, and an awful job to be doing. But there he was with the pigs, longing to eat the scraps left aside for them. He was in an unimaginably awful situation. Broke, hungry, longing for home. In that dark place, the son hatches a plan. Now he knows he's given up his right to be a son. That went with the division of the property and the destruction of his family's good name. However, he also knows that the hired men on his farm were well treated. The hired hands didn't go hungry, so he decided to go back, not expecting to be received as a son, but with a proposal that he work for his living, that he become one of the workers on his father's farm. He even practiced his speech. He said, "I will go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against God in heaven and against you. I am no longer good enough to be called your son. Treat me like one of your workers.'" It was a good plan. Sound in every way and totally taking responsibility for the mess he'd made of things. With confidence in the course of action, he set off for home. Jesus goes on and tells that while the young man was still a far way off, his father sees him coming. The expectation for most would be the father might have crossed his arms, rolled his eyes, and thought, well, this better be good. Or maybe he would send somebody to meet the fellow and tell him to turn back because he wasn't welcome. But not this father. This father sees the boy, and all he sees is his son, who he lost, returning home. He can't hold back. He runs to greet the son. This is a culture where the men don't run. Children ran, workers might run, women might run, but men didn't run, and leaders of families in particular didn't run. But his father wasn't worried about appearances. He ran, hiking up his robes so he wouldn't trip on them, probably a bit ungraciously in the process. As he approached the young man tried to get the plan out that he had devised. Maybe he held up his hands and started to make his carefully prepared speech. "I know I didn't deserve to be called back to be your son. Let me live as a hired man." The father wouldn't hear any of it. He wasn't looking for anything from this young man. He threw his arms around his son's neck, called for the best robe to be put on him, and some sandals for his feet for this weary road traveler. More significantly, in his long list of instructions to his servants, the father called for a ring. This was no ordinary ring. The ring in question would have been the family seal, a ring used to mark documents as legally binding. By putting that ring on his finger, the father is, without any hesitation, welcoming his son back into the family. Now the father doesn't stop here either. He shouts for a celebration, the killing of a fatted calf and a great party, because his son who was dead is now alive. His son who was lost has been found. There is a no-holds-barred reception of a son who wanted his father dead, had his father divide up and sell off the family land, and left everything of importance to his father behind in search of whatever. The past didn't matter. All that mattered is that the son was lost and now he was found. He was dead and now he is alive. He is home. He is right where the father wants him. This is a powerful story. This is a great parable. The talk of the unwavering, extravagant love of a father who is not willing to let any of his children go. There's something prodigal in the love. We hear this story and smile at the message that God loves us that much. And it is a powerful message. It means that no matter what we have done, where we have gone, what mistakes we have made, we are loved. It means that no matter what shame we feel or worthlessness, or if we feel like an outsider, we aren't. We are all children of God. To be back in that close relationship with God, all we have to do is turn around and come home. But you see, if we stop here with a simple view of God, we miss the beat of the story. The whole lost son returns home is just one act of one parable. Jesus had more to tell. Context is the key in this story, as in many others. There is more to know, more to discover. Remember the people Jesus was speaking to. For the ones who were criticizing him, for those assured of their own goodness, there is a deeper message. Beyond all you have to do is come home and God will welcome you, which is a wonderful and powerful truth, there is something more to consider. There is another character, one we have not heard about but haven't met yet. One we have heard of but have not met yet. Remember, the father had 2 sons. There is one who doesn't yet know that his brother has returned and who has not yet made it to the party. There is more to this story. That is what we will talk about next week as we continue our sermon series on this parable that really expresses the heart of Christianity.